Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. It is Thursday, February 16th, 2023. Time for another show. We're ready to go here at this point. I don't know. Well, we're as ready as we usually are. How about that? It's an interesting morning once again. At least things are, in fact, working over at Netroots Radio headquarters. I got the thumbs up from Justice. Greg's computer still in the repair shop, I believe, for today, but we're hoping for a Monday return. That leaves us with a wide open slate, of course, and plenty of material socked away in pocket that we can turn to and, fill your time with. It'll be well worth it, I assure you. And, a little bit of discombobulation in the KITM headquarters as we're scrambling around, trying to adjust to a slightly new schedule for some preschool activities. We're all going back to preschool. It's fantastic. And, just a little bit of, just one or two wrenches thrown in the normal works today that, I think we can deal with it. Checking around on social media for news stories as well. And I actually, not in social media, non-social media, popping up in my email promotions, which I really should put a stop to, except it is occasionally useful. This morning's Dispatch from the Hill, with a nice headline that you don't frequently see in the mainstream media outlets. It's usually a Democrats in disarray sort of thing, and they have no alliterative equivalent for Republicans. So you take it when you can get it. Republicans worry as self-inflicted wounds pile up. That sounds nice. And I'd like to recount what those wounds might be. Just for us, that's a pep talk in the morning, I guess. Alexander Bolton, longtime reporter at The Hill, has this one here. Republican lawmakers are wary of their party's propensity for self-inflicted wounds. That's good. Somebody's been awake and paying attention, and are hoping for more discipline heading into the next election cycle. Leading Republicans think that the House GOP's, you know how we like to pronounce it here, the House GOP's raucous reception of President Biden at last week's State of the Union played into the president's hands, it did, and that the proposal by Senator Rick Scott to sunset all federal legislation after 5 years is a political gift to Democrats. That's true too. So far so good in terms of getting it right. And the key word is that they're looking for more discipline heading into the next election cycle, but that's exactly what they're missing, and their current situation appears to make all but impossible. There's certainly no chance, very little chance, I would think, that the looniest Republicans who are now have seized control of the Republican conference and therefore the House of Representatives are likely to give that up in the name of party unity, because, of course, they believe that everybody else should give up what they believe in the name of party unity. Come and do what we say. That's how you'll have party unity. Well, anyway, some Republicans on Capitol Hill are dismayed that Rick Scott, hasn't disavowed his 12-point plan to, quote, rescue America. That one, I guess, was the title of his plan, despite repeated Democratic attacks, and they are disappointed by lapses in message discipline, such as Senator Ron Johnson's call for annual votes on Medicare and Social Security, which he described as, quote, a legal Ponzi scheme. We think he's talking, in his mind, of course, we think he's talking about his view of Medicare and Social Security. We think that perhaps his one-year sunset, which is even more drastic than the 5-year sunset, is the Ponzi scheme. But hey, to each his own. Johnson says that doesn't mean he wants to cut Social Security. Yeah, sure. But some of his colleagues worry that Republicans are already giving Democrats too much ammo heading into the 2024 election. All right. And, we'll take it. I think Republicans have got to be wise in how we talk about these issues. Well, you're supposed to be wise in everything you can be. But, All right. Well, thanks for the tip, Senate Minority Whip John Thune. I think probably most people want to be wise in things. Biden's job approval rating has been mired in the low 40s for much of his first term in office, but Democrats still managed to expand their Senate majority and exceed expectations in the battle for the House last year. Many Republicans, believe the Democrats' strong showing in the midterms had more to do with their own party's mistakes than the popularity of Biden's agenda. I mean, I'm sure it had a lot to do with it, certainly. There was nothing wrong with Biden's agenda, and it was probably fairly popular in its own right, but it wasn't something that people were overwhelmingly excited about voting for necessarily, although it was very strong. It's very wonky, and it's not the sort of thing that gets a whole lot of people revved up, even when it's really good. So, I suppose that's a correct analysis, whether or not we think, let's say, that they have a real capability to deliver the kind of discipline it would take for them to recover. That's a different story. I doubt it. Biden seized on Scott's 12-point plan at his State of the Union speech, telling the nation that some Republicans want Medicare and Social Security to sunset every 5 years. And I know he was roundly booed and attacked for that, but we just read just seconds ago that some Republicans want Medicare and Social Security to sunset every year. Or at least, I guess sunsetting wouldn't be the ordinary term for it, but I'm sure what Johnson is proposing here is that it be taken off the books of mandatory spending and be discretionary appropriated spending every year so that you could have a fight over it, hijack it each year, cut it each year. Oh, I'm not for cutting it. I just want to vote on it every year because I love wasting my time. Obviously, he wants it to be brought up for a vote each year so that he can have the opportunity to cut it. I doubt very much whether he's going to be bringing any amendments to the floor to increase the spending. And you can do that. You have that opportunity annually. But I've never seen him take that. So I think we all get where he's going with that one. Senate Majority Leader Charles Schumer on Monday pointed to Johnson's recent comments to advance Biden's claim. Almost as if to prove President Biden correct, Senator Johnson of Wisconsin reacted to the State of the Union by going on radio and calling for annual votes on Social Security, calling it a Ponzi scheme, Schumer said on the Senate floor. Schumer also pointed out that the House Republican Study Committee released a budget proposal last year that raised the Social Security retirement age and cut some benefits to certain recipients. Johnson on Wednesday defended his comments by arguing that future Social Security recipients aren't going to get what they put into the trust fund, given the nation's mounting debt. It's not a sustainable system, he said, of Social Security, noting that the number of workers paying into the system to support retirees has dwindled. A Ponzi scheme is you take from investors. You don't invest it, you spend it, and you pay off early investors. The later investors get hosed. That's the definition of a Ponzi scheme. I guess the real question is, does anybody think of Social Security taxation and contributions as investments? It's a Ponzi scheme if you tell people that the money you're giving me is being invested and I will pay you dividends later on. And in fact, usually some spectacular rate of return. And instead of paying even the early investors with actual returns, you pay them with later investors' money. But if you tell people what I'm doing is collecting money from everybody and I'm using that money to pay retirement benefits to current retirees, and then later, as we collect more and more payments from current workers, you will eventually retire and you will be the direct beneficiary of payments made by current workers who will then get their turn one day when current workers are paying for their retirement. It's a little bit less of a Ponzi scheme if you say, hello, my name is Charles Ponzi and here's what I'm going to do. And then people say, all right, yes, we will do that. I think that takes the Ponzi edge off of it a little bit. But members of the Senate Republican leadership team don't see any point in talking about Medicare and Social Security reforms when they don't think Democrats have any good faith desire to reform those programs, and instead will just use GOP proposals to play offense in next year's election. Which they might. That's true. Of course, if your proposals are all terrible and make the public fear you're being in control, then I don't know if it's a bad faith thing to say that they'll use those plans. If your plans are routinely terrible and frighten people, and we tell people this is the truth, these are their plans, I don't see that there's anything less than good faith involved in that. I mean, I guess propose a good faith plan that doesn't scare the crap out of people and doesn't leave old people out in the cold, and see what happens. Senator John Cornyn said Biden loves that, doesn't he? That is to complain about and point to and find fault with Republican plans. Referring to Biden hammering Republicans over Scott's plan, what it's showing is that Biden has no interest in saving Social Security or Medicare from insolvency, he said. He's just going to use it as purely a political piñata. Cornyn said later that Democrats are using Scott's plan as a diversion to shift public attention away from the nation's serious debt problem. Senate Minority Leader, thank you very much, Mitch McConnell on Tuesday tried to quash once and for all Democratic claims that Republicans want to use the expiring debt limit as leverage to cut benefits for seniors. It continues to come up. The president was talking about it in the State of the Union, McConnell told reporters last week. So let me say one more time, there is no agenda on the part of the Senate Republicans to revisit Medicare or Social Security, period. Okay, so what's bad faith then about saying that they either have their published plans to cut it or they have nothing at all? I mean, I don't think that's a bad faith thing, and nor do I think it's bad faith to say what the state of play is. I don't know. Well, I shouldn't worry too much about whether or not John Cornyn is telling the truth or not. Anyway, Shelley Moore Capito pointed out that Speaker Kevin McCarthy said last week that Medicare and Social Security cuts are off the table and fellow Republicans need to get the message. Capito, the chairwoman of the Senate Republican Policy Committee, said GOP senators discussed trying to keep on a unified message as much as we can. With the speaker and our leader, the two Republican leaders being on the same page, that's going to drive the message of the day, she said, referring to McCarthy's and McConnell's pledges not to cut Medicare and Social Security. Members are going to disagree, she said, acknowledging different views on strategy within the GOP conference, but she argued that party leaders are smart to stay away from what has become the third rail of politics. Has it become the third rail of politics? Yeah. I guess just recently, like 40, 50 years ago, I think they were using the term third rail of politics. Specifically, Medicare and Social Security cuts would be that third rail in the debt limit discussions with the White House. I'm unified with the message that we need to stay away from these things to solve some fiscal problems, she said. Some Republican senators say they weren't thrilled with the jeering and raucous reception Biden received from House Republicans last week at the State of the Union address, which appeared to play into the president's hands in front of a national television audience. Schumer said the contrast between Biden and these guys screaming and yelling and just calling names is going to serve the president so well. Veteran journalist Chris Wallace said the GOP lawmakers who heckled Biden literally played into his hands. I mean, not literally, like, they didn't, there was no touching going on here, but we all love and enjoy a good misuse of the word literally. Later, when he was asked about Wallace's observations that Republicans might have unwittingly made the president look good, Senator Tom Tillis, North Carolina, replied, "That may be fair." He said that Republicans should stick to reasonable and enduring policy proposals, instead of made-for-television antics that give Democrats a chance to change the subject to the behavior of Republican personalities. "I think we're missing an opportunity to differentiate," he said. "Focus on policy. If you get that done, it will age well." Yeah, well, it would, but that requires a policy. Another Republican senator who requested anonymity, this is interesting, to comment on House colleagues, all right, said that decorum is good for the party's brand. We ought to be polite and respectful to each other. This is not theater, it's governing, the senator said, commenting on the unruly reactions to Biden's speech last week. It's damaging to the politics. It appeals to a handful of people and turns off a whole bunch more. I don't know how frequently I've ever seen a person acknowledged as a United States senator, but requesting anonymity to comment on that in particular. That is, I guess, I've certainly never seen somebody say, yeah, it's okay to attribute it to a senator, but I want anonymity. I'm sure that we've read sources that were anonymous sources that were just said someone close to the issue or someone in a position to know, and not acknowledging that it was a senator, but it turns out that it was a senator. I've never seen it quite like this. That's unusual, I think. Anyway, looking ahead to next year's election, Senate Republicans say they need to do a better job of helping ensure that the most electable candidates advance to the general election, something they believe did not happen last year in Arizona, Georgia, New Hampshire, and Pennsylvania, where Democrats won. So that's a direct shot at you four. And I think you know who you are, even if I don't remember who you are. One was Blake Masters was Arizona, right? Herschel Walker was Georgia. I forget the guy's name, but the loony ex-military guy in New Hampshire, and Dr. Oz in Pennsylvania, who's back to hawking garbage on TV, I see. Anyway, at a one-day retreat last week, GOP lawmakers discussed the need for the National Republican Senatorial Committee to get more involved in the candidate vetting and selection process next time around. And I think it's more a matter of interacting with the states to make sure that they understand this is all about winning the finals, not the semifinals, Tillis said. Capito said the retreat was forward-thinking. Candidate recruitment is a repeating message, making sure we get candidates that win the primary that can win the general, she said. What a real genius. She's really breaking new ground there. Okay, well, that's the end of the article. Actually, the interesting part of the article ended a little while earlier. I was hoping for some more interesting nuggets there, but really, once we got to Republican reactions, individual reactions to the fact that they're worried that self-inflicted wounds were piling up, it became less interesting. All right, let's bookmark that so that we can include it in the roundup. And then, maybe I'll pop it over here, and then, whoops, all right, well, I didn't mean to do that. Too bad. Made things worse. All right, back to Pocket to see what we've got. Oh, I want to remember to keep an eye on things on social media. I already forgot to retweet John Shiflett's kickoff post that says we're live. And by the way, it's been interesting to see John calling out the articles as we read them to see if perhaps he can engage some folks to come on and listen to the program and join in. Let's see. By the way, what else have we got here? I think Mighty OCD probably chiming in on the overuse, the comical overuse of the word literally here, saying, remember millennials actually changed the meaning of the effing word they used so wrong for so long and so confidently that Webster changed it last year. Is that right? Okay. So that there's a now an accepted figurative use of the word literally, which is really amazing. But language evolves, but maybe that one shouldn't have. I wasn't ready for that one. All right, back in Pocket. Let's see, what have I got here? What did I put this in here for? Some of these things I have to look at and see exactly what they were. All right, so this one's paywalled. Why the heck did I want this item in? Sometimes Pocket makes it very difficult to see just what it was you were putting away here. Oh, okay. All right. Well, I think this is actually, all right, never mind. We'll delete that garbage and move on to this garbage. Ready for this one? This reported yesterday afternoon on CNN. We're saddened and disappointed to learn that the DOJ has officially decided not, for some reason, not to charge Matt Gaetz in this sex trafficking probe, which naturally Republicans, I'm sure, will be running around saying, well, he's innocent of this, and we don't know whether that's really the case. We just know that the DOJ, for one reason or another, has opted not to charge him. Not an encouraging thing. It certainly doesn't lend any credibility to the claim that he's actually guilty, but I have the feeling that that's kind of where we are. We just lack I guess the DOJ lacks the evidence to put the case together, which is incredible given the fact that they got a conviction for his good friend, the tax assessor there, who was saying, I procured young women for him all the time, and he kept Venmoing money to me and to them and saying, thanks for the sex trafficking, basically. So I don't know why they decided not to do it, but maybe the article will tell us, but I have a feeling it will be left wanting in the end. The Justice Department has informed lawyers for Representative Matt Gaetz and multiple witnesses that it will not bring charges against the Florida Republican after a years-long federal sex trafficking investigation, which doesn't happen to everybody, but happened to pick Matt Gaetz to investigate for several years for some reason. Senior officials reached out to lawyers for multiple witnesses on Wednesday, a source familiar with the matter told CNN, to inform them of the decision not to prosecute Gaetz. The final decision was made by the Department of Justice leadership after investigators recommended against charges last year. We have just spoken with the DOJ and have just been informed that they have concluded their investigation into Congressman Gaetz and allegations related to sex trafficking and obstruction of justice, and they have determined not to bring any charges against him. Gaetz's lawyers, Mark Mukasey and Isabel Kirshner, said in a statement. Tim Jansen, a high-powered lawyer representing the congressman's ex-girlfriend, said that DOJ officials reached out to him on Wednesday and told him they would not be charging Gaetz. The ex-girlfriend was a key witness in the case and had testified before the grand jury in Orlando last year. As I recall, she was giving testimony that indicated that they should be going forward with this. I don't know, but maybe not. The congressman's office said in a separate statement that the department informed them that the investigation has ended and no charges will be brought. The DOJ's formal decision not to charge Gaetz, who has been serving in Congress since 2017, marks the end of a long-running investigation into allegations that the congressman violated federal law by paying for sex, including with women who are younger than 18 years old. Gaetz has repeatedly denied any wrongdoing. But, of course, all we can really say is that the DOJ agrees that they can't prove the wrongdoing, at any rate. Prosecutors working on the case recommended against charging Gaetz in September, in part because of questions over whether central witnesses in the investigation would be perceived as credible before a jury, CNN reported at the time. But the final decision not to move forward with charges came from senior department officials. The DOJ declined to comment. The investigation into Gaetz began in late 2020 under then Attorney General Bill Barr, but ramped up significantly after Gaetz's close friend, Joel Greenberg, pleaded guilty to federal crimes, 6 federal crimes, in fact, including a sex trafficking charge, and agreed to cooperate with prosecutors. Greenberg's cooperation led investigators to look at Gaetz, along with other allies of Greenberg, for any alleged sex trafficking or obstruction of justice. The investigation also scrutinized several Gaetz associates, including Dr. Jason Pirazzolo, I'm not certain whether he pronounces it that way, who accompanied Gaetz on a 2018 trip to the Bahamas that was a key focus of investigators. Pirazzolo was pushed out of his medical practice after his name surfaced in some reports about the investigation. In a statement, his attorney, David Haas, said, "Today we were informed that the DOJ is ending its investigation. Dr. Pirazzolo requests that he and his family's privacy be respected, as the last few years have been extremely difficult to endure." 2 other people in Gaetz's orbit also became key cooperators, including the ex-girlfriend, who worked on Capitol Hill and has been linked to Gaetz as far back as the summer of 2017, and a Florida radio host who began cooperating after pleading in a separate bribery scheme. Then, by late 2022, there were several signs that the Justice Department's case had nearly ground to a halt. The most obvious indicator was the prosecutors finally agreed to schedule a sentencing date for Greenberg after months of delays, while he continued to cooperate with the ongoing Gaetz probe. Greenberg was sentenced to 11 years in prison in December. And who knows? Let's see if he starts talking and saying anything else at this point. He might be quite annoyed that he's going to sit in jail for 11 years and Gaetz is going to walk, if he feels like there really is a case to be made against him. But, well, we may never know. There's also that possibility. Okay, so that brings us to an interesting subject, which, I could spend, let's say, the entirety of the day on, and it's easy and possible to do thanks to the writing of someone we, I believe, know fairly well via Twitter, and who has published a series of rather lengthy articles on Roger Stone. Jennifer Cohn, Cohn, who I know we've seen around on Twitter, and is one of the investigative writer reporters who make frequent use of social media, has done this extensive work on Roger Stone that I think deserves to be shared at this point. Sometimes I think she gets a little further out ahead of the curve than the rest of us, but I haven't seen her go completely off the rails at any point. And I think, having reviewed the first 2 installments of this 3-part series, I actually think it's worth going back and taking a look at this. I think her major point here is that Stone has, for whatever reason, maybe by design, maybe his design, more or less been left aside in the investigations into Trump world. And it may have something to do with the fact that he was always backed by the threat of pardon, which actually came through for him. And so maybe it was just a less fruitful pursuit, knowing that he had been pardoned for a lot of these things. But he's connected to so much, it seems worthwhile to go through Jennifer's backgrounder on this, even at the cost of an hour or two.
Sup, fam? It's your boy Darwin, aka Darwin_Darko, aka the most reasonable man in America, aka KITM's senior black correspondent. You might remember me from such recordings as Spacemen vs. Space Cadets and We Need to Talk About Joe Biden. Today, I want to bring you good news about that thing you've been struggling with. Do you suffer from giving too much of a damn? Do you turn on the series of tubes and find yourself outraged at the particular way some news organization strung some sentences together only to realize, nope, this is not some fictional hellscape? Well, guess what? You no longer have to accept the life of giving too much of a damn. You can do something about it, because even you, yes you, can be a show contributor. Now I know what you're thinking. Hey, Mr. Most Reasonable Man in America, I'm not some professional podcast talking guy. Don't worry about it. Do you have a smartphone or some other electronic recording device? Well, that's all you need. You too can have a segment where you can read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Fair warning though, side effects may include general punditry, having opinions and hot takes, getting stuff off your chest, and hearing your own voice. If your recording lasts longer than 5 to 7 minutes, please consult kagrox@gmail.com. That's KAGROX@gmail.com.
Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Well, let's see. There are a couple of things. I'm just trying to monitor all the hashtags. There are definitely some good suggestions out here that I'd like to get back around to, but I know I've got some long reads ahead of me, so maybe we'll jump in there rather than switch gears now and then switch gears again. We'll just stay in the gear that we're in and see if we can get all the way through it and switch gears later. But it's only Thursday, so we should be able to get to a bunch of these things. This is an interesting backgrounder, I thought. Jennifer Cohn did an excellent job here. Does she give any sort of additional biographical information? Yes, down here at the bottom here. Jennifer Cohn is an attorney, election integrity advocate, and political writer whose articles have appeared in the New York Review of Books, Who, What, Why, The Independent, TYT, that's the Young Turks guys, right? TYT Investigates, the Brad Blog, and Salon. You can follow her on Twitter if you want to do anything at the Bird site, but I think she's also on Mastodon, so you're better advised, I think, to find her there. So yeah, my recollection of her writing style, I guess, probably reflected in the frequent, I guess, appearances of the Young Turks Investigates, the Brad blog, etc. A couple of places where I would say, you know, to be kind, I think I would say they're out front. They like to risk things by getting out ahead of their skis just a little bit in some of these cases. You know, there's a wide variety of people whose theories I give some credence to. Some more than others. Some I think are more careful than others. Jennifer Cohen is leading edge, not bleeding edge, but leading edge, I think, in a lot of things. And in this case, I think has done us a great service in reminding us all, at the minimum, of just what a scumbag Roger Stone really is, and how dangerous it is to leave him aside when focusing on others. And it becomes almost impossible not to re-involve Roger Stone, because Roger Stone makes a practice of re-involving himself. But a good reminder of who he is and what he's connected to. The first installment in this, published in the Bucks County Beacon, and entitled, this was back at the end of January, entitled Roger Stone Deserves More Scrutiny for His Role in the Events Leading to January 6th. I cannot argue with that title. Stone incorporated violent extremist groups into the Stop the Steal effort, which was itself a product of his warped political mind, writes columnist Jennifer Cohen in the first of a 3-part series. I don't know if the third part is out yet, but just as well, I don't know if I could read all the way through all of them today. But this is the first part. Political fixer Roger Stone deserves more in-depth scrutiny than the bipartisan January 6th committee could or did provide in its recent 814-page report, which focused primarily on former President Donald Trump. You know, kind of had to, right? Although the report mentioned Stone 76 times, it would be difficult to overstate the role that Stone played in the 2020 Stop the Steal effort, a coordinated campaign that relied on a fire hose of falsehoods and the specter of potential violence to try to overturn Trump's 2020 defeat. The January 6th assault on the U.S. Capitol occurred on the heels of that campaign. Leaders of the Proud Boys, who are currently on trial for their role in the assault, and the Oath Keepers, many of whom have already been convicted for their role in the assault, allegedly plotted in advance to disrupt the transition of power. Both extremist groups were inclined toward violence even before the Stop the Steal campaign inundated them with unfounded claims about a stolen election. By the way, at the end of this series, you'll be, let's say, you'll hate Roger. I'll just say it. You'll hate Roger Stone and about, 8 to 10 other specific Republican operatives, I think probably with a great passion, and you'll be right to do so. Okay. Both the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers had also worked with Stone, who in 2000, yes, the year 2000, had coordinated a manufactured rebellion outside a Florida election office in order to disrupt the recount of the presidential race between Republican George W. Bush and then Vice President Al Gore. Many of you remember that one, and you should be reminded of the fact that he coordinated both and that there's extraordinary similarities between January 6th and what happened in 2000. And this is a quarter century between the two, and it's been going on since forever, and it's very troublesome. I'll just get right to it. The event is often called the Brooks Brothers Riot because many of the demonstrators were Republican operatives in business attire. Embedded at this point is a tweet of someone sending around the very widely circulated photo of the Brooks Brothers rioters with some number of them, 10 of them, identified by name and position at the time, that they were in fact almost all campaign or Capitol Hill Republican staffers. Per his own account, by the way, also including among the names there that you would recognize is Matt Schlapp, who has gone on to some further notoriety since then, but at that point was there as a Bush campaign staffer. Per his own account, Stone presided over the protest, and here we mean the Brooks Brothers riot, using a walkie-talkie as he sat inside a nearby Winnebago. So, I mean, really personal coordination of this. it goes on there to say the protest was more physical than is generally known. If you haven't watched a video of it, here's one that I recommend. And I clicked on it and took a look. And it gives a better sense of just how physically intimidating the whole situation really was. Demonstrators shouted, let us in, as they pounded on the door to the vote counting room. According to the New York Times, several people were trampled, punched, or kicked when protesters tried to rush the doors. The disruption stopped the recount. I mean, it disrupted an official proceeding. That's insurrection when you do it at the Capitol. And we just sort of let that whole thing slide in 2000. Like, no one got killed, so I guess we shouldn't do anything. But, you can't allow these situations to keep happening. The disruption stopped the recount just as Bush's lead had dwindled to only 537 votes. The recount never resumed, throwing the election to Bush. And all the things that happened as a result of that came down to, they were counting the votes. It might have reversed the results, so they went down and banged on the door and punched people in the face until they stopped counting, and therefore history records 2 terms in office for George W. Bush. Oh, okay, what? Yeah. Even Fox News host Tucker Carlson, Stone's longtime friend, has said in the introduction to one of Stone's books that Stone, quote, subverted democracy during the 2000 recount. He apparently meant it as a compliment. Now, imagine a modern-day Brooks Brothers riot. I mean, that was modern day, too. Except with Stone's friends from the Proud Boys and Oath Keepers leading the assault. Try adding in a cabal of Stone-associated propagandists, including a former president, a retired lieutenant general, and a team of attorneys, supposed officers of the court, who inflamed these extremist groups and others with unfounded claims about a stolen election. Unfortunately, we don't have to imagine it. We lived it on January 6th. Stone has served as Trump's informal advisor for decades. The 2 men were introduced by their mutual mentor, the late mafia lawyer Roy Cohn. No relation, I suppose, to Jennifer here, but they do share the same last name. Like his proteges, Cohn disdained the law, once proclaiming, I don't want to know what the law is, I want to know who the judge is. He was, of course, disbarred just before his death in 1986. And Jennifer Cohn's tweet about the subject is embedded here. According to author Tim O'Brien, Cohn taught Trump to, quote, use lawsuits like machine gun bullets. As for Stone, he learned from Cohn, that rhymes, that nothing's on the level. Stone says that as a young man he attended a meeting with Cohn and Fat Tony Salerno, the future mob boss of the Genovese crime family, during which Cohn imparted that everything's fixed, everything can be handled. In 1980, upon Cohn's request, Stone delivered a suitcase to an attorney associated with the Liberal Party of New York. The contents of the suitcase were apparently intended to persuade the Liberal Party to run a spoiler third-party candidate to siphon votes from then-President Jimmy Carter in the presidential race in New York. But he claims that he didn't look inside the suitcase to see what it contained. The Liberal Party did run a spoiler candidate in 1980. The spoiler, John Anderson, some of you may remember him, did siphon enough votes from Carter to throw New York State's 41 electoral votes to Ronald Reagan, who secured the presidency that year. And, well, I don't know, history recorded that we had 2 terms of Reagan, too, plus 1 term of his vice president, George H.W. Bush, which, of course, laid down the path for George W. Otherwise, George W. Bush is an idiot from Texas that nobody wants anything to do with. But trading off of his father's success as Reagan's vice president, we have this. That's history all of a sudden. Get used to it, I guess. It was also in the 80s that Stone formed a lobbying firm with a slick political operative named Paul Manafort. Perhaps you know him. The firm was known as the Torturer's Lobby due to its willingness to represent brutal dictators. There's a tweet embedded here from Craig Unger. I guess referring to that fact and showing a picture of the young Manafort and Stone together as the torturer's lobby. Stone was smitten with one of the firm's biggest clients among the dictators and torturers, Donald Trump, for some reason. One of their big clients. He has said that he wanted Trump to run for president as early as 1987. So a long association with Trump, with the idea in mind that he'd be president. When Trump finally decided to run for president in 2015, for the 2016 election, Stone served as a top strategic advisor to the campaign. He officially left the campaign in August of 2015, but remained in contact with Trump and even drafted proposed tweets for him about wanting a, quote, détente with Russia. And there was no chance that Trump himself knew the word détente, of course. So it's a likely story, I think. According to Manafort, who joined the campaign in March of 2016, the two men had remained so interconnected that it was, quote, hard to define what's Roger and what's Donald. In October of 2015, Stone brokered Trump's appearance on InfoWars. Then, as now, the show featured Alex Jones, a rabid conspiracy theorist who has repeatedly and falsely claimed that the victims of the mass shooting at Sandy Hook Elementary School in 2013 were paid actors. Jones has since been ordered to pay more than $1.4 billion to the victims' parents, who endured years of harassment from Jones's gullible, gun-crazed followers. By appearing on InfoWars, Trump gave Jones a terrifying veneer of legitimacy, which is odd looking back because at the time Trump was still just a clown, but all right. Anyway, your reputation is amazing. I will not let you down, Trump told Jones. I'm not certain what that means, but there you have it. Trump's embrace of Jones also helped him secure the support of Jones's alarmingly large audience. In January 2017, Stone claimed in an interview with the Connecticut Mirror that Jones had reached between 18 and 19 million people per day in the last week of the 2016 election. Jones ensured that these followers loathed Hillary Clinton, the 2016 Democratic presidential nominee. On November 4th, 2016, Jones told them, how's this for a statement? When I think about all the children Hillary Clinton has personally murdered and chopped up and raped, I have zero fear standing up against her. That's what he said. And that's his voice. and the phlegmy undertones to the lingering from my cold actually served me well in doing the Alex Jones thing, I think. YouTube, we don't believe that. Just for the record, that's a quote from Alex Jones, who is crazy and wrong about all of those things and deserves to be banned for life from all of those services, but I don't know whether he actually is. Anyway, by the way, I mean, it's an interesting statement on a number of levels, but I mean, if you really believe that Hillary Clinton personally murdered and chopped up and anybody, children or otherwise, that's when you should have more fear for standing up against her. I mean, you'd be right to do so if she had done those things, but you should do so with a little bit of trepidation. She murders and chops people up, but she's not going to chop you up because you're too chunky to chop up, I guess. I don't know what the thinking is, but anyway, you get the idea. He's crazy, and that's a stupid statement, and Donald Trump just sits there for it. He wasn't there at the time, but that's the kind of guy that Jones is, and it was well known at the time. During the 2016 campaign, Jones employed Army veteran Joe Biggs as a, quote, reporter. The two men had known each other for years, and Joe Biggs is another of the guys that you'll come to hate with a passion by the time you reach the end of this article or this series of articles. Biggs later joined with Jones and another person you're going to hate if you don't already, Jack Posobiec, another of Stone's proteges, in promoting Pizzagate, the lie that Hillary Clinton and other Democrats were running a satanic pedophile ring in the basement, which didn't exist, of Comet Ping Pong Pizzeria in D.C. One of Jones's followers eventually opened fire in the pizzeria while searching for the non-existent basement and child prisoners. Miraculously, no one was hurt. Jones apologized only after the pizzeria owner threatened legal action against him. And really, you just shouldn't have accepted the apology. You should have just gone with the legal action. Although now it would be very difficult to collect, as he's also on the hook for another $1.5 billion. So you might never get your money. Biggs had secured his job at InfoWars in 2014, the year of the armed standoff between Nevada rancher Cliven Bundy and the federal government over Bundy's refusal to pay $1 million in grazing fees. The Oath Keepers had, of course, traveled to the ranch to support the Bundys during the standoff, which ended when federal agents retreated. In 2017, Stone would lobby Trump for Bundy family pardons, which probably endeared him not only to the Bundys, but also to the Oath Keepers. Biggs missed the Bundy standoff in 2014, but he caught up with the Oath Keepers in 2015 during their armed patrol of demonstrations in Ferguson, Missouri. The demonstrations marked the one-year anniversary of the death of Michael Brown, a black teenager who was shot and killed by a white police officer. You all remember that. The Oath Keepers provided security for Biggs as he covered the demonstrations for InfoWars. Biggs had also reported on the original 2014 riot sparked by the shooting. A photo from that event shows Biggs wearing a hat and overalls emblazoned with 1776, of course a reference to the American Revolution. By then, 1776 had become a rallying cry for InfoWars and Alex Jones. In 2013, Jones had infamously told Piers Morgan that, quote, 1776 will commence again if you try to take our guns. In 2008, as far back as 2008, he had written a book called The Answer to 1984 is 1776. The date would also become, of course, as you know, a rallying cry of the January 6th assault on the U.S. Capitol. And they also went with Civil War, by the way. So they weren't sure what day it was, either 1776 or 1861, give or take. But you remember that Lauren Boebert tweeting, of course, today is 1776. All right. Well, Biggs and Jones traveled to the 2016 Republican National Convention, which ran from July 18th through July 21st in Cleveland, Ohio. On the first day of the RNC, during the America First Unity rally, the two men led a Hillary for Prison chant. The rally was co-hosted by Jones and Roger Stone, who was late to the event, explaining to the audience that he had been delayed due to meetings with members of the Trump staff. This despite supposedly no longer working for the campaign. 2 days later, in a since-deleted InfoWars video, Biggs bragged about assaulting a protester who had been exercising his First Amendment right to burn the American flag. I ripped the guy's shirt off and punched him and kicked him, and the cops were like, It was intense, man, Biggs boasted in the video. Stone would later praise Biggs as a scrapper and street fighter. A Proud Boy since 2018 at the latest, Biggs is currently on trial with other one-time Proud Boys leaders, including Enrique Tarrio, who worked as a volunteer, a quote, volunteer for Stone, while serving as national chairman of the Proud Boys organization. Each of these Proud Boys leaders has been charged with seditious conspiracy for their alleged involvement in the effort to overturn the 2020 election. Like Biggs, Jack Posobiec, the Stone protege who helped spread Pizzagate, attended the 2016 Republican National Convention in Cleveland. During an event near the RNC, he was photographed standing behind Stone, and that photo is embedded in here. At another event near the RNC, Posobiec met Richard Spencer. Remember the dapper Nazi? Yeah, or the punchable Nazi? Both the same guy. An anti-Semitic leader of the, quote, alt-right movement. According to Spencer, Posobiec introduced himself as Stone's associate. And here's another photo of the two of them together. In March of that year, Breitbart News had published an article that called Spencer a leading, quote, intellectual of the alt-right. The article had ignited a brief wave of quasi-mainstream support for Spencer and his movement because it had downplayed the movement's Nazi-esque tendencies. The piece had been co-written by Stone's friend Milo Yiannopoulos. Boy, what a universe here. Spencer's popularity soon tanked due to his followers' penchant for throwing Nazi salutes in public and his involvement in the deadly Unite the Right rally, that one in Charlottesville, which he organized with then Proud Boy Jason Kessler in Charlottesville, Virginia. We will discuss the rally further, she tells us, in part 2. Somewhere amid the bipartisan backlash from these incidents, Milo and Posobiec soured on Spencer as well. I think Spencer's popularity also tanked due to the widely circulated and widely memed video of him being punched in the face by a passerby while he was trying to give a television interview. Keep that in mind. That apparently worked pretty well. For a time, however, Posobiec had spread anti-Semitic messaging himself. Less than a week after the 2016 RNC, Posobiec had replied to Joe Biggs on Twitter with a quote tweet where he put a Jewish reporter's name inside triple parentheses, an anti-Semitic hate symbol known as an echo. You remember that probably. Posobiec's use of the echo symbol was also reported by Hate Watch. And here is that tweet embedded in the piece. A few months later, Posobiec posted multiple tweets that included 1488, another anti-Semitic hate symbol, as further reported by Hate Watch, the 14 being standing in for the 14-word slogan about securing the future for white children. The 88 stands for Heil Hitler because H is the 8th letter of the alphabet. It's a weird bit of numerology, but now a well-known Nazi signal. Posobiec and Stone would later try to blame the January 6th insurrection on Antifa, which stands for anti-fascism. Posobiec, and I don't know if I'm even pronouncing his name correctly, but I don't think he deserves the courtesy of checking. Posobiec became involved with the Oath Keepers. In April of 2017, he told his followers on Periscope that he worked closely with the organization. By then, the Oath Keepers had been involved in 2 more attempts beyond the Bundy Ranch standoff in 2014 to generate armed standoffs, one at Sugar Pine Mine, that didn't go anywhere, I guess, and another at White Hope Mine. It's a perfectly named place, but no one remembers either action. Posobiec didn't say how he had hooked up with the Oath Keepers, but Joe Biggs would be a good guess. Posobiec had posted a photo of the two men together in October of 2016. Here is the photo. They're giving the OK/white power / troll the libs hand sign, of course. Trump's convention manager for the 2016 Republican convention was Stone's former lobbying partner, Paul Manafort. Stone had recommended Manafort to the campaign. Manafort had spent most of the preceding decade representing former Ukrainian President Viktor Yanukovych. I think we've learned that his name is pronounced that way. I used to say Yanukovych, but I guess it's Yanukovych. This is where things turn real interesting because Ukraine is involved and we know what's going on there. He had landed the Ukraine job, Manafort did, after Ukraine's 2004 presidential election in which Yanukovych's pro-Western opponent, Viktor Yushchenko, remember this, was poisoned by a particular strain of dioxin found only in a handful of countries, including Russia, but not including Ukraine. Importantly enough, and here is a tweet with the side-by-side photos of what happened to, what's his name? Yushchenko. He was, of course, horribly disfigured by the attack. Yushchenko had remained in the race despite suffering excruciating pain and disfigurement from the assassination attempt. Independent exit polls. This is where things get real interesting, and you'll begin to remember a little bit of the backgrounders that we discussed about Ukraine before we were talking daily about the armed conflict there, and thinking about the history of political machinations there and Manafort's history there in particular. You'll remember some of this stuff, right? Independent exit polls funded by the U.S. and other Western countries showed that Yushchenko defeated Yanukovych in that first race in 53 to 44 in the race. I mean, a convincing difference. But according to the official report, somehow, Yanukovych had won by a slim margin, 49.5% to 46%. The official results were rigged. Telephone intercepts of discussions between members of Yanukovych's campaign staff showed that the campaign had tampered with the server of the State Electoral Commission to alter the results in favor of Yanukovych. Those telephone intercepts were leaked to the press, triggering nationwide protests known now as the Orange Revolution. You remember that? That was the key. 2004, Orange Revolution over the intercept of these phone calls where they said, yeah, we manipulated the outcome in the counting. We changed the result. A do-over election was conducted. We usually don't do those things, but I guess in Ukraine they did. This time, the official results, surprisingly enough, I guess, showed that Yushchenko, the pro-Western candidate, had won 52-44, pretty similar to what the exit polls from the initial election had been saying, surprisingly enough. Yanukovych, who had been supported by Putin, conceded in disgrace. Man, it was Manafort's job at that point to help Yanukovych stage a comeback. He succeeded when Yanukovych won the presidency in 2010. That's startling to realize that that might have even actually happened. Yanukovych's 2010 opponent, Yulia Tymoshenko. Remember when we discussed her and her political background and her business background way back when? Well, she claimed, believe it or not, that the 2010 election was stolen. But at the time, of course, everybody thought, well, how could that be the case? Although you would think that they would be used to that in Ukraine and that claim would go further given that everybody witnessed the 2004 election being stolen. But unlike 2004, there were no tapes to prove it, and the U.S. called the election free and fair. Soon after taking office, by the way, Yanukovych locked up Tymoshenko. Locked her up. Yes, they actually did it there in Ukraine. The U.S. and the EU condemned her incarceration as having been politically motivated. And it was, and we learned all about that. And then the lock her up movement here. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Let's continue with this extensive reading now that we've diverted into interesting Ukraine stuff. But I always did find that rather interesting. And I think when we, it must be years now since we spent some time talking about Yulia Tymoshenko and what happened to her. But I know I marveled at the time about that weird parallel that Paul Manafort had managed things in Ukraine and engineered a comeback and a political victory for Yanukovych over Yulia Tymoshenko, and had the whole thing had culminated in calls for locking her up. His political opponent, he wins the presidency. We're going to lock her up, and I don't know whether they did during the campaign did anything similar to chanting the lock her up thing, but obviously that was still on his mind when he began working on the Trump campaign, and lo and behold, the Trump campaign ended up with the theme of lock her up being the chant. Despite the fact that there was nothing to lock her up about, that didn't matter to them. They made it up as they went along. But anyway, that was sort of a startling realization. But back to the article's recitation of facts here. More trouble ensued in 2013 when Yanukovych scotched a much-anticipated trade deal with the European Union in favor of closer ties to Russia. The decision prompted mass protests that escalated into a revolution, another one, when state police shot protesters. The revolution, this time around, called Euromaidan, or Maidan, just for short, because the protesters were shot in Maidan Square. And a couple of embedded tweets illustrating the event appear here. Yanukovych's regime had also, by the way, a small matter of stealing $40 billion from the country. Yanukovych himself had lived in a lavish palace that included a private zoo and was half the size of Monaco, which, Monaco, small, but it is a country. So, having an estate that is half the size of a country, even if it's a small country, is no small matter. When the revolution erupted, Yanukovych fled to Moscow, where he asked Putin to intervene militarily on his behalf. And lo and behold, we've been stuck in that cycle ever since. Putin, in fact, ordered the invasion and annexation of Crimea in 2014. This marked the first time since World War II that a European country had annexed the territory of another, per the Atlantic Council. So how do you like that? In 2013, Euromaidan protests, they toss out Yanukovych. He flees to Moscow. He pleads with Putin, we've lost control of Ukraine. You should invade the place. And the invasion begins. What do you know? The same year, a Russian-speaking hacker operation called Cyber Berkut, all one word there, but capitalizing the B, hacked Ukraine's election reporting system. Keeps getting hacked. In 2015, Russian military officers allegedly hacked Ukraine's power grid as well. By the way, they were indicted on those charges in 2020. The U.S., in coordination with the EU, responded to Russian aggression toward Ukraine with sweeping sanctions. Putin wanted them lifted without relinquishing Crimea. For that, didn't seem to be happening, right? Well, I think you should lift these sanctions, but without my having to give up what I've taken, the invasion that I've launched and the annexation I've launched, in exchange. What do you think? Well, the answer is no. Well, the only way you're going to be able to get that, he needed a friend in the White House. So why not go get one if one is available to you? In 2015, Russia interfered in the U.S. presidential election by hacking the Democratic National Committee, John Podesta, that's Hillary's campaign chairman, and the Republican National Committee. It held on to most of the RNC documents, but according to a detailed indictment against Russian hackers, the hackers used an encrypted file to send the Democratic Party documents to WikiLeaks. You know them, the international organization run by Julian Assange. Assange released a batch of them right before the 2016 Democratic National Convention in Philadelphia, triggering a large, supposedly organic anti-DNC demonstration amplified by Assange with the hashtag Feel the Burn. Perhaps you remember it. An apparent endorsement of Hillary Clinton's primary opponent, Bernie Sanders. Below is a photo of Jack Posobiec, who attended the protest. That is interesting. I recall that, I remember the Feel the Burn hashtag. It's not really being alleged here that Assange invented the hashtag, but rather that he pirated it and jumped on board it and used it to try to make an organic part of the already existing normal and democratic leaning supporters of Bernie Sanders think that this was something that, one, that they should pay attention to, and two, that was meant to inure to their advantage, and it was something that they should, add to their list of grievances and protests at the Democratic Convention that year. But beyond the organic, or the attempt at making, raising organic interest among organic and existing Bernie Sanders supporters with this information, they just thought maybe it would help supplement things if Jack Posobiec, of all people, who was an unknown factor at that time, shows up and joins the ranks of Bernie-supporting protesters outside of the DNC. And here, this tweet, what's the date of this one? I don't know. It's cut off. But at any rate, it's a Twitter user by the name of I Talk You Bored says, did not know that Jack Posobiec was an agent provocateur at the 2016 DNC protests. Full video is here. There's a link for it. First appearance at, you'll see the whole thing, but it tells you where to find him in there. But there he is, out there standing right in front of the signs being held up by, Bernie Sanders signs held up by protesters outside. And what do you know? Jack Posobiec just happens to find common cause with people trying to disrupt the Democratic National Convention. In October of 2016, Roger Stone, remember him? That's an article about Roger Stone, told CBS News that, quote, I do have a back channel communication with Assange because we have a good mutual friend who travels back and forth from the United States to London, and we talk. After one of the WikiLeaks dumps, Alexandra Preate, Preate, Steve Bannon's longtime publicist, sent Stone a 2-word message, well done. Some of the documents published by WikiLeaks spawned the Pizzagate hoax, promoted, of course, by Posobiec, Biggs, and Jones, when conspiracy theorists made specious claims about them, such as the notion that references in the documents to cheese pizza might be code language for child pornography. I guess because they both start with the same letters, C and P. I don't know. But that was apparently enough for millions of weirdo QAnon ditto heads around the world. Simultaneous with the WikiLeaks dumps, an anonymous Twitter account published fake medical records, creating the false impression that Clinton was gravely ill, a lie promoted by Stone and other Trump surrogates, including Rudy Giuliani. The Christian right engaged in sketchy behavior during the 2016 campaign as well. In 2015, a Christian data analytics company called United in Purpose was tied to a massive leak of 191 million voter data files. In November of that year, the data turned up on a Russian hackers elite forum. United in Purpose had been founded by a convicted embezzler who had served time in San Quentin, in case you were wondering about that. After the leak, a United in Purpose director, Bob McEwen, met in Ukraine for some reason with a political operative named Boris Kolesnikov. Kolesnikov was a close associate and deputy of Rinat Akhmetov. Remember him? We've actually used his name before. Rinat Akhmetov, a Ukrainian oligarch who had financed Manafort's work in Ukraine to that point. A few months before McEwen met with Kolesnikov, Manafort himself had directed a business associate to prepare detailed memoranda to Kolesnikov and Oleg Deripaska, a Russian oligarch who had also financed Manafort's work, but now claimed that Manafort owed him money. Manafort hoped to use his position in Trump's campaign to, quote, get whole with Deripaska, an ally, of course, of Vladimir Putin's. During the Republican National Convention, over which Manafort presided on behalf of the campaign, right, the GOP made one change only to the party platform, removing language about arming Ukraine against Russian aggression. We all remember that, but just a good reminder that happened at the Republican National Convention. They didn't make any other changes because Trump had no idea what he wanted to do policy-wise. He just wanted to annoy people and make trouble and see people beat up hippies. But the one thing that they got to was a change about language about arming Ukraine against Russian aggression, which wouldn't ordinarily be a very traditional Republican position to take, but for some reason was changed. Manafort also shared detailed campaign polling data with Konstantin Kilimnik, a Russian operative who had worked for Manafort's firm in Ukraine. Manafort reportedly expected Kilimnik to share the data with Deripaska, a close associate of Kilimnik, and with others in Ukraine, including Sergei, as they say there, Lovochkin. We'll say that. Lovochkin. How about that? Who, according to the New York Times, was involved in, Well, that vote rigging conspiracy during Ukraine's 2004 presidential election. It's amazing. Well, I guess Ukraine should serve as an object lesson there. If you have the opportunity to root out and punish people who are involved in these efforts to overthrow a democratic government and you don't do it, they will come back and do it again. But, I think we already knew that. Russian hackers, again, also attacked the country's election infrastructure, successfully breaching, at a minimum, voter registration systems in a small number of states. That's here in the United States. I was thinking, again, in Ukraine. But no, it's here, including, among them, a small number of states, Florida and Illinois, and also succeeded in gaining access to electronic poll book supplier VR systems used in multiple states. According to a bipartisan congressional report, they targeted systems in all 50 states. Then President Barack Obama would later assure the public that the federal government had, quote, not seen evidence that vote tallies were changed. Had such evidence existed, however, the government may not have been well positioned to find it. Some states, including Pennsylvania, still used paperless voting machines in many counties, precluding manual audits and manual recounts. The courts shut down the recounts, such as they were, after Trump's legal team and a Trump PAC objected to them anyway. During the campaign, however, Stone claimed without basis that the primary and general elections both would be rigged against Trump. It was during the 2016 campaign, and I think you remember this, that he coined the Stop the Steal slogan. He formed a Stop the Steal PAC and website to fundraise, asking for $10,000 donations by saying, if this election is close, they will steal it. He even threatened to send angry Trump supporters to the delegates' hotel rooms to stop the steal during the Republican National Convention. Stone made it known that he had thuggish friends, the people he would send to those hotel rooms, by headlining a Bikers for Trump event, also during the convention. The organization was founded in 2015 by Chris Cox, a one-time D.C. insider who didn't own a bike himself, so naturally he would start Bikers for Trump, but had nonetheless corralled plenty of people who did. Cox later said that the group's intention was to, quote, protect Trump with, get this term, a wall of meat. Ugh. But I guess it works. After Trump secured the Republican nomination, Stone turned his attention to the general election, where, absent Russian interference, Trump's prospects seemed bleak. The outlook was so dismal that 123 Republican leaders wrote an open letter urging the Republican National Committee to cut funding to Trump's campaign, which, of course, the RNC did not do. In the face of Russian election interference, Stone insinuated that Democrats would be the ones rigging the election against Trump. During an interview with Milo, remember Milo Yiannopoulos, he encouraged Trump to say, for example, I am leading in Florida. All the polls show it. If I lose Florida, we will know that there's voter fraud. If there's voter fraud, this election will be illegitimate. And the election of a winner will be illegitimate, and we will have a constitutional crisis, widespread civil disobedience, and the government will no longer be the government. This is 2016. In support of this claim, Stone said that Hillary Clinton had met privately with Dr. Brenda Snipes, the election supervisor in Broward County, Florida, an assertion that Snipes and Clinton both denied. Stone, quote, promised that photos of the meeting would be available shortly on the InfoWars website. But 2 days later, there were no photos on the website, and Stone couldn't be reached for comment. This feels like it's pulled out of a news report from somewhere along the line here. But I'm not certain where. The Sun Sentinel, it looks like, is the link that's coming up. It wasn't until Trump himself defied the polls to win the 2016 election that Stone recanted the allegation against Snipes. He said he'd been given incorrect information, which he had repeated, as reported by the Sun Sentinel. Stone later told Who What Why, the publication Who What Why, that Trump's team had planned to block tunnels and roads if, in their estimation, there had been overwhelming evidence that Trump lost the election due to fraud, despite Russia's help. Under that scenario, bikers for Trump and the Proud Boys might have come in handy. Stone's friend, Gavin McInnes, had founded the Proud Boys in September of 2016. McInnes had announced the group's formation in Takis magazine, where Richard Spencer, the anti-Semitic alt-right leader, was an editor. Well, just to round out this part one here, a little quote just to let you know what kind of guy Gavin McInnes was. A quote from McInnes in this magazine. Describing the Proud Boys and what they were about. We will kill you. That's the Proud Boys in a nutshell. That's the quote. McInnes later said of the organization he created, "Can you call for violence generally? Because I am," he added. That's the kind of guy he is, and he's paid pretty much zero political price or criminal price for it along the way. Now he says he's disassociated from the Proud Boys. Part 2 comes up next and has already dropped. I don't think part 3 has, but we'll see what happens when we get to the end of part 2 here. But we continue because this is informative and a good reminder of who we're dealing with and who's still floating around out there. January 6th made a mistake. The committee made a mistake leaving this stone unturned. This is part 2 of a 3-part series exposing political fixer Roger Stone's central role in creating the climate of hate, division, disinformation, and physical intimidation that culminated in an insurrection on January 6th, 2021. Again, reading from the Bucks County Beacon, where Jennifer Cohn has put this together. Like Fat Tony from The Simpsons, Roger Stone has a long-standing practice of conducting his business via unofficial protégés who handle much of his dirty work for him. As discussed in part 1, the real Fat Tony, the late mob boss of the Genovese crime family, was a client of the late mafia lawyer Roy Cohn, who mentored both Stone and Donald Trump. I got to scroll past a couple of embedded tweets establishing those facts. Stone teaches his own protégés that they can succeed as political arsonists if they follow Stone's rules, which include, in his own words, and these are all quotes, of course, politics is not about uniting people, it's about dividing people. Open multiple fronts on your enemy. He must feel confused and besieged from every side. Hate is a more powerful motivator than love. Attack, attack, attack. Never defend. Admit nothing. Deny everything. Make counter accusations. Those who are outraged will vote. And finally here, you have to be outrageous to get noticed. Sounds pretty familiar. Much like former President Donald Trump, and there's a footnote on this one. We'll get to that at the end of the reading. Stone and his protégés strive to ruin the lives of their most effective political opponents and critics. Investigative journalist Bob Norman landed on the receiving end of such an attack after reporting on one of Stone's former clients, Sheriff Scott Israel of Broward County, Florida. According to Norman and others, Stone had used a host of his storied dirty tricks to help elect Israel. Israel, an apparently corrupt Democrat, had returned the favor by hiring 3 of Stone's associates on the public dime, including Stone's personal assistant, his co-author, and a woman named Jen Hobbs, who was then the fiancée of Andrew Miller, Stone's protégé and political do-boy. I'm not certain I've ever heard the term do-boy, but I assume that means something like gopher. But hey, who knows? Israel had also promoted Stone's stepson, Scott Stone, to detective, even though the stepson had been with the office only a short time. It was an uncommonly fast promotion, according to the Daily Beast. Soon after Norman published his investigative reports about Israel, Andrew Miller, Stone's do-boy here, transformed the sheriff's old campaign website, The Bugle, into a fake news website that published weekly hit pieces on Norman, smearing him as demented and an alcoholic. As detailed by Norman for the Columbia Journalism Review, fake accounts on Facebook with some facetious names like Benjamin Gay began jumping on posts in which Norman was mentioned to hurl slurs. Stone, of course, never admitted to being behind these attacks. One day, Norman received a call from a police lieutenant who directed Norman to the Bugle site, which that day featured what looked like a large police sketch of Norman with the headline, "Margate Peeper on the Prowl." The Bugle site, which claimed that the peeper had been peeking inside a pregnant woman's window, was updated to identify Norman as the perpetrator. The lieutenant told Norman that he'd already determined that the post was a hoax after speaking with Miller from the Bugle, but wanted to give Norman a heads up it was out there. As explained by Norman, it somehow got even worse. One morning, he read this bizarre fabricated allegation about himself on Twitter. There are reports that WPLG Local 10's Bob Norman is being investigated for touching a 19-year-old male in studio. Resignation soon? ? It had been posted by Sam Nunberg. Do you recognize the name? Another disciple of Stone's who was working for Trump at the time and who landed a spot in the Trump campaign and was an associate of George Stephanopoulos is our George. George Papadopoulos, right? Was that it? I can't remember anymore. The George that we've got, that we're stuck with, that is now on television, is Stephanopoulos. The George that effed up their campaign is Papadopoulos, right? But Sam Nunberg, as I recall, associated with that guy and that episode. Norman confronted Stone in the summer of 2014 with a camera in tow. He says that Stone quite literally snarled and lashed outward at the camera in a manner that seemed almost prehistoric, like a lunging pterodactyl. He hit it with his hand before he sped off. The attacks on Norman subsided soon after the confrontation, so maybe a confrontation like that is a good idea. But Stone would soon find other targets while expanding his nefarious media operation beyond the confines of the Bugle. In 2013, the South Florida Business Journal reported that, according to Stone, the Bugle was being acquired by an existing Palm Beach media company that owns several other publications and has investment capital, and that the Broward Bugle website will be expanded, as will their coverage. It was also in 2013 that Jacob Engels, a recent college graduate, befriended Stone and started a propaganda site called the East Orlando Post, which currently lists revenue of between $1 and $5 million. In 2014, Engels launched a second website called the Central Florida Post, but it ends up being another fake news operation. In 2018, Stone, Engels, and deputies from Sheriff Israel's office converged upon Broward County's recount of the Florida Senate race. This is 2018. Before the recount, then Governor Rick Scott, you know him, the Republican, had eked out a razor-thin victory against then Senator Bill Nelson, a Democrat. During the campaign, Scott had rented an email list from Roger Stone, as reported by Media Matters. There's a link to a tweet alleging that embedded here. Israel became involved with the recount after Rick Scott filed a lawsuit requesting that the Florida Department of Law Enforcement and the Sheriff's Office impound and secure all voting machines, tallying devices, and ballots when they are not in use until the conclusion of the recount. Eerily similar to something that comes up 2 years later in the call for impounding all voting machines in the general election in 2020. Rick Scott's lawsuit, which was filed on November 11th, was premised on unsubstantiated election fraud claims spread by Stone and his minions. Another practice run. 2016 is a practice run. They practice again in 2018. No one can be surprised that they're back in 2020. On November 8th, Stone himself had suggested that Rick Scott, who was governor at the time, order FDLE, the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, to impound all ballots in Broward County, also a familiar tactic of his from the 2020 Brooks Brothers riots when they were demanding that the ballots be seized by the authorities. According to Posobiec, Stone had personally flown into Broward County that evening. Posobiec assured his followers that, quote, the steal will be stopped. So, again, Stop the Steal, used in 2016, now used again in 2018, of course, used most infamously in 2020, and now poised to come back again, I'm sure, in 2024. Hi, everybody, it's me, David Waldman. Yes, the same guy who interrupts you all the time. Interrupting you one more time, just to tell you again, another reminder that your contributions are what keep this show on the air, and patreon.com, patreon.com, is still among the easiest ways to make the sustaining subscription donations that keep us afloat. Are you ready for the pep talk about how our Patreon campaign is still going strong and growing? Well, too bad. Yeah, the plain fact is we actually are headed in the wrong direction, and whereas we once had about 175 monthly patrons, we're now actually down below 150. Time to recruit some more. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. For those of you in a position to support the show, patreon.com does make it easy to make those secure, recurring monthly contributions to do so. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. We've been through a lot together. The worst of the pandemic, we hope. The worst of the insurrection, we hope. So go ahead and treat yourself. You don't need an excuse. Give yourself the gift of a little something you enjoy in life. Support the show. And of course, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running on those options too. So thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We couldn't, or at least shouldn't, do it without you. Hope you'll be on board soon too. Thanks for all your support. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We'll hopefully get to the exciting conclusion, at least of part 2 of Jennifer Cohn's new series of articles on Roger Stone. I see that John Shiflett is alerting people once again to the fact that that's the topic, although he's got links to older articles on the similar subject from Jennifer Cohn discussing what she had written about, almost a year ago at this point, but establishing the close relationship with photographic evidence, etc., of Roger Stone's close relationship with the Proud Boys and Oath Keepers, but slightly different tack being taken in these articles here. We left off, though, by mentioning the effort by Rick Scott to use unsubstantiated allegations of voter fraud to try to secure his own election to the Senate in 2018, and a lot of familiar themes popping up there. But because it didn't end in a violent insurrection besieging the Florida State House, we don't remember it in the context of 2020 and the January 6, 2021 insurrection at the Capitol. But we left off with November 8th, Stone himself suggesting that Rick Scott, who was governor at the time, order the FDLE to impound all ballots in Broward County, and flying in and assuring people through his protege, Jack Posobiec, that the steal would be stopped. In order to settle Rick Scott's lawsuit, lawyers for the Broward County Democratic Party agreed to allow Sheriff Israel to send in 3 deputies to supervise the recount at the election office. So Roger Stone's hand-picked sheriff is the one who's going to supervise the recount for everybody. That's just great. As I mentioned, and I mean here, as Jen Cohen has mentioned, Stone's stepson, Roger Stone's stepson, served as a deputy in Israel's office at the time. Another Broward County deputy, German Bickbau, that's his name. German Bickbau, interestingly enough, had founded a biker group called Spetsnaz, which includes a chapter in Moscow. Yeah, Russia. According to the Miami Herald, a Russian intelligence officer turned Miami real estate investor named, ready for this one, Svyatoslav Mangushev. Wow, I'm mangling it, but it's a new name and difficult to get through. Well, he helped Bickbau form this organization. I don't know why a Russian intelligence officer turned Miami real estate investor would need to help an American form a motorcycle gang here in the United States. Except, oddly enough, it's not a motorcycle gang here in the United States per se. It's also one that has somehow, for some reason, a foreign sounding name, Spetsnaz, and 2, an affiliate organization in Moscow. And I wonder whether this is the biker gangs that we read about when we were reading about the weird enclave of Russian denizens in the Trump developments in, where the hell was it? I can't even remember. Sunny Isles, right? Is that it? And that we were reading about all the various weirdos and degenerates who lived in the buildings, and some of them included people who were oddly politically connected biker gang organizers. And who knows whether this is one of those gangs. Well, that's a little odd. What would he need help for? You guys going to have a motorcycle club? You guys got motorcycles? Yeah? All right, cool. We're a gang. You don't need Russian intelligence help for this. Well, anyway, it says here that he did help Bickbau form this organization. And who was Bickbau? One of Sheriff Steve Israel's deputies at the time, while they're in the act of monitoring the recount happening in the Broward County elections office. Well, as it turns out, the group's members once asked for official recognition from Russia's biggest biker gang, the Night Wolves, an infamous group that has strong ties to Russia's security services. So it's perhaps the Night Wolves with which people living in the Sunny Isles high-rises were associated. I'm not sure. The Night Wolves played a role, believe it or not, in the Ukrainian uprising and are now under U.S. sanctions. Now returning to Jacob Engels. As for Engels, he and Ali Alexander, you know that name, and other members of Stone's posse, such as Laura Loomer, as it turns out, assisted Rick Scott by recycling Stone's Stop the Steal messaging from 2016, this time in 2018, and organizing protests specifically targeting Broward County's election office and Supervisor Brenda Snipes. And here are some photos from the 2018 Stop the Steal activity, and it says here in the caption that you can see Posobiec, Laura Loomer, Jacob Engels, and Joe Biggs and Ali Alexander all in this photo. And it's also, by the way, someone who looks curiously to me like Murdery Trader Green, but not exactly like her, so I can't be certain that it's her. And in fact, on closer inspection, it's probably not, because that would have been caught, I would think, by Jenny Cohn, and it would have been pointed out. But you never know. Maybe this was something that she processed in 2019 before we even knew who Murdery Trader Green was. Anyway, Snipes, a Jeb Bush appointee, had legitimate competence issues, which made her an easy target for Stone and his malevolent underlings, including Engels, who at one point put on a white wig and a black pantsuit to imitate her. which I'm sure was a hilarious joke, but we might point out now that's a drag show and you're a groomer and you have to be arrested or possibly murdered immediately. I mean, I don't make the rules. That's just the way it is. I'm sorry, those guys are in control, but it is what it is. Yeah, I mean, we should. The tweet or the Facebook post is right here for your use if you want to let everyone know that Jacob Engels is a drag performer. Stone's underlings also included Bikers for Trump, that wall of meat from 2016. During one of the protests outside of Snipes' election office, Bikers founder Chris Cox, the one who doesn't have a bike, claimed to discover a Ziploc bag of ballot ties. I'm not even certain what ballot ties are, but okay. Maybe, I don't know. But maybe it just means ballots. Laura Loomer, the other lunatic at the protest, presented his alleged discovery as evidence of ballot rigging. Trump said that he, too, intervened in the 2018 Florida recount by personally dispatching the FBI and the U.S. attorneys to Broward County. Now, federal officials have denied Trump's claim, and Trump is an untrustworthy source. But after recent reports of rogue FBI agents in New York and Florida, we would be naive to ignore the possibility that corrupt agents helped undermine Florida's recount. In the end, the recount left Scott's whisper-thin victory in place. The official results showed that he had defeated Nelson by only about 10,000 votes out of more than 8 million cast. And, I mean, I've just sort of forgotten about that entirely. As in 2016, however, it was the Democrats who should have been worried about the 2018 election's integrity. For one thing, many voters in 3 Democratic-leaning South Florida counties, Broward, Miami-Dade, and Palm Beach, did not receive their absentee ballots on time or at all. In all 3 of those counties, more Democrats requested mail ballots than Republicans by a margin of almost 2-1. But somehow, Republicans ended up returning a higher percentage of ballots, according to the Miami Herald. Second, then Senator Bill Nelson, who was a member of the Senate Intelligence Committee at the time, he warned that Russians had penetrated some voter registration systems in the state. He said the federal government had concealed this information from state officials who needed to take steps to secure the systems. Well, Nelson was right about the breaches, but no one believed him. Some even mocked him until Special Counsel Robert Mueller and later the FBI confirmed it in 2019. By then, Scott, though, was safely ensconced in the U.S. Senate. How interesting. I don't have a clear memory of this episode, but it would have made a lot more sense in hindsight if this had happened in 2015 before we began to hear all the time about Russian interference in the 2016 election. But this is 2 years after that, and he's alleging this, and I guess maybe at that point it's like pre-Mueller investigation, but pre-Mueller Russia fatigue that makes people say, oh, come on, the Russians are fixing every single election. But as it turns out, Bill Nelson is spot on with it. And for some reason, we all look the other way. And now we're stuck with Rick Scott and his plans to sunset Social Security and Medicaid, among other things. Even after confirming this breach, the federal government, as well as Ron DeSantis, who was by then safely ensconced himself as governor, withheld the names of the affected Florida counties. Now, another strange development in this chain of events, Representative Stephanie Murphy of Florida, one of the most vocal proponents of more transparency about Russian election interference, later penned an op-ed for the Washington Post titled, "Why is the Russian meddling in 2016 such a big secret? I'm not allowed to say." Well, during the 2018 campaign, Murphy's Republican opponent, Scott Sturgill, had paid $2,000 to the Central Florida Post, that fake news site run by Jacob Engels, and $2,500 to CFP Media Strategies, also run by Engels. Even after Murphy defeated Sturgill, Engels used his various platforms to harass her. In 2021, for example, StephanieMurphyForSenate.com redirected to the Central Florida Post, Engels' own website. Engels had used the same website previously to mock Andrew Gillum when he ran against DeSantis in 2018. He also used it to abuse Murphy, the first Vietnamese woman elected to Congress, whom he smeared with the pejorative Saigon Murphy. Gee, and an inventive one at that. Okay, scrolling down past the embedded tweets detailing all of this, Engels had also served as press manager for Enrique Tarrio, the organization's, the Proud Boys, national chairman, who in March of 2020 had helped Engels destroy Gillum's political ambitions once and for all with a salacious photo of Gillum passed out naked in a pool of vomit. That was pretty graphic, wasn't it? As early as 2017, Proud Boys, remember, we're reminded here for some reason, that Gavin McInnes, Proud Boys founder, had stated on his show, "Can you call for violence generally? Because I am," as reported in the Miami New Times. None of this could have made Murphy feel safe. When Murphy tearfully announced her decision to not seek another term in 2022, after all, Stone and Engels were jubilant, gleefully attributing her decision to the abuse that Engels had inflicted upon her. Engels wrote on his Central Florida Post website, "Victory! How we ousted communist Congresswoman Stephanie Murphy," while Stone wrote on Telegram, "Jacob Engels, prominent gay journalist, drives Florida Congresswoman Stephanie Murphy from the Senate race." Interesting. And here embedded a Mastodon toot from Jenny Cohen saying, with a picture of Stephanie Murphy's press conference deciding not to seek another term, "Look at her eyes. We may never know all that they did to her." It's a interesting question, what they may have done with all that. Now, by the way, I jumped over all of the embedded tweets that that she was using to illustrate the point of Proud Boys' involvement in harassing Stephanie Murphy, but also in launching attacks against Andrew Gillum. And I think in some of these tweets, I guess, or maybe it's somewhere else in the article, there is an allegation that, or you know, some hint that perhaps, that there had been some involvement by the Proud Boys in somehow obtaining this photo, or perhaps even staging this photo, or arranging for, I don't know, infiltrating the gathering at which Gillum supposedly does this and passes out in a pool of vomit and ends up naked. Was the photo somehow staged, was the implication, but now I don't see that. And I'm looking back here. And I had missed this little entry here that by then Engels had been photographed with the Proud Boys on multiple occasions, and some of those photos are embedded here, and I jumped over that. And let's see, is this, that tweet doesn't have anything about the Gillum thing here. Oh yeah, and here's Jen Cohen's Mastodon message about it on March 9th, 2022, noting, while Enrico Tarrio is in custody, maybe someone can ask him how he happened to get that photo of Andrew Gillum passed out naked in a pool of vomit, because that sure looked like a crime scene. Were the Miami Proud Boys involved? Sexual sabotage is one of Roger Stone's hobbies. She's basically speculating, well, one, how does that picture even happen? And two, how does it get into the hands of the Proud Boys for them to distribute? Nobody actually asked that question. They were like, well, there he is, and he's disgraced, and so therefore we can't be voting for this guy, and he did in fact lose the election. But nobody asked, how is it that this incident even happened, and how is it that there were photographs and they got into the hands of the Proud Boys of all people? Well, anyway, then on to the speculation about what they may have done to drive Stephanie Murphy out of office. And let's see, continuing the story. As for Stone's friend, Sheriff Israel, he was eventually ousted over his agency's horrific mishandling of the gun massacre at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in 2018. Scott Sturgill wasn't the only Florida political candidate who worked with Jacob Engels in 2018. That year, Engels also helped elect disgraced former Florida tax collector Joel Greenberg, one of Roger Stone's many crooked friends. That's pretty interesting on Engels' record as well. During this 2018 campaign, Greenberg, of course, falsely accused his opponent, a music teacher by the name of Brian Butte, of pedophilia in a letter that he mailed to Butte's employer, as detailed by the Orlando Sentinel. In the letter, Greenberg pretended to be a student at the school that employed Butte. Engels posted a video accusing Butte of I don't even know what this is supposed to mean, I don't want to know, a tromboning incident as a teacher, thus amplifying Greenberg's lie. A far-right activist named Leslie A. or L.A. Key, who had a business with Engels, helped amplify the lie as well. Journalist Zachary Patriso has called her, I guess L.A. Key, a longtime confidant of Roger Stone. Key and her husband owned a separate business called MAGA Advisory Group, guess what that might be about, that had a consulting contract with Greenberg's office, but the business showed no example of work product to auditors, according to local news channel WFTV, Channel 9. So, got to skip down again over some of the tweets embedded with photos of L.A. Key and others involved in these smears against this teacher. A fake Facebook account named April Goad, G-O-A-D, spread Greenberg's lie against Butte as well. Key claimed to personally know April Goad, who did not exist, as reported by the Orlando Sentinel. Some other tweets embedded here as well. Just sort of telling the story of how this play was used here. Brian Butte, an SRS co-founder and teacher who filed to run against Greenberg, was falsely accused of abusing a student in letters to his school. Engels later made allusions to the allegations before they were public in videos, calling Butte creepy. What else links the smears on Butte to Engels? A profile linked to Roger Stone's troll network was April Goad. The April Goad profile promoted Engels' video attacks on Butte, and L.A. Key, pictured below with Engels, claimed the profile was real. After Brian ignores the videos on Facebook and the fake profile created in his name that is linked to porn sites, Jacob Engels will not stop. A profile named April Goad is used to call Brian creepy and linked to Jacob's tromboning videos. L.A. Key claims to know that she knows April Goad. This, then, as Jenny illustrates in one of her social media posts, is the fake April Goad account amplifying the lie about Butte, as conveyed in a video by Jacob Engels, and screenshots of it featured here. The April Goad account was not removed until July of 2020, when Facebook finally eliminated a sprawling network of reportedly inauthentic accounts associated with Stone, Engels, and the Proud Boys. April Goad was part of that network, according to a detailed report by Graphica, linked herein. Greenberg, of course, pleaded guilty to stalking Butte after investigators found his fingerprints on the letter to Butte's employer. And of course, he was caught up in a number of other legal imbroglios as well. Ironically, as a result of that investigation, the one of the smear letter that they found out about, prosecutors discovered that it was Greenberg who had sex trafficked a minor, another offense to which Greenberg pleaded guilty. Greenberg reportedly implicated Representative Matt Gaetz, another Stone operative, in the same criminal offense, though Gaetz has never been charged, and we found out yesterday the DOJ says he won't be. Well, that's pretty weird. But there you have also, by way of support for that, the Ron Filipkowski tweet from way back when. If you read the plea agreement of Joel Greenberg, you notice the dates in 2017 when he was alleged to have provided women and or girls for sex acts to, quote, other adult men. The date of this picture, displayed in his tweet, of Roger Stone with Matt Gaetz and Greenberg, fits right into that time frame. Now she continues, there's more. While investigating the Butte matter, prosecutors discovered that Greenberg had stolen hundreds of thousands of dollars from the tax collector's office, which he had converted to crypto and spent. He had, in addition, set up a crypto company inside his official office, which facilitated these crimes. Greenberg founded his crypto company, which he stupidly, I think, called it Government Blockchain LLC, with crypto enthusiast Samuel Armes, or Armis, Armes, who also served as president of the Florida Blockchain Business Association. Florida Blockchain's board of directors included Miami crypto queen, that's enclosed in quotes there, Erica Gemma. It's Eryka, Erica Gemma, Gemma, the one-time girlfriend of Enrique Tarrio. How odd. On December 30th of 2020, Gemma had given Tarrio a document called 1776 Returns, which outlined a plan, this is December 30th, 2020, a plan for storming the U.S. Capitol and other government buildings on January 6th, 2021. That is unusual, don't you think? Late last year, the DOJ announced that it is investigating Gemma's ties, if any, to Jacob Engels. In the same announcement, the DOJ said that it is reviewing whether the 2018 Stop the Steal campaign served as a blueprint for the circumstances that led to the January 6th assault on the U.S. Capitol. Duh, kind of course it does. There's more. Next up, the passage on Cinco de Mayo. Yeah, we're going to run out of time on this, but hey, let's keep going. Even if the DOJ's investigation eventually sidelines Engels, Stone has a seemingly endless supply of ruthless apprentices to help him attack critics, demonize and intimidate the left, and manufacture outrage. In May of 2017, Stone and several of these apprentices, Jack Posobiec, Ali Alexander, and Cassandra Fairbanks, attended a party thrown by Milo Yiannopoulos. The party was live-streamed, of course, providing a glimpse into the twisted world in which these political miscreants hatched their schemes. As discussed in Part 1, Milo is a far-right provocateur and writer who has helped Steve Bannon mainstream anti-Semitic alt-right leader Richard Spencer. That is, until Spencer's followers gave away the game by throwing Nazi salutes as Spencer declared, "Hail Trump." That video embedded here as well. In February of 2017, however, Milo fell on hard times, losing a major book deal with Simon & Schuster after giving an interview in which he defended pederasty. You remember that. Milo hoped that this party would usher in his triumphant return. It didn't. He called it Cinco de Milo, which is a clever name, but it just didn't work. Milo paraded around the party with sunglasses and a white python draped around his neck as several shirtless men trailed behind him. Stone wore a rainbow-plaid suit to the fiesta, the pictures of which are here, and some of them are, indescribable. He's with some real characters, let's say, in all of that. It was during Cinco de Mayo that Stone apparently took the Proud Boys pledge. whatever that may be, and I guess he got himself sworn into the group. It was also during Cinco de Mayo that Stone posed for a photo with Enrique Tarrio, who has said that the party was his first encounter with the Proud Boys. How do you like that? Some Cinco de Mayo revelers posed for photos with assault weapons as props, because why not? At one point during the event, Fairbanks tweeted a photo of her friend carrying an assault rifle and wrote that he was, quote, ready for Antifa, which of course had no interest in or knowledge of the party and was not going to be there anyway. Posobiec and his wife, Tanya Tay, were apparently ready for Antifa too. Here's their pose with the guns. And then a rundown on Posobiec again. A reminder of the other things that he has done in his time as a Roger Stone protege, including planting that Rape Melania sign at a Trump protest to try to make the protesters there look bad. He also falsely claimed that pipe bombs had been planted during a protest of George Floyd's murder, and promoted the false claim, of course, that Antifa had been responsible for an Amtrak train derailment. Well, anyway, more about this crazy party and the surrounding craziness with Roger Stone. There's a lot more to it, and of course a part 3 still to come, I believe, but really unbelievable rundown of the dirty tricks and hijinks that Jack Posobiec has been involved in, Stuart Engels, all, and Ali Alexander, all at the prompting of Roger Stone. And he continues to do the same and more. And thanks to the pardon that he was able to secure, he appears to be off the radar now at this point in terms of continuing investigations into January 6th. But this is an excellent reminder of the fact that he's a nexus for a lot of this activity, both in and around January 6th, but also other infamous flashpoints in American civil dissolution, whether it's the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, other Proud Boy gatherings. I see here some pictures of the tiki torches from the Unite the Right rally. By the way, some news on that front in terms of all Republican accusations being confessions. Maybe we can get to that one tomorrow. We still have Friday ahead of us and still have a lot to contribute here from what's in store for you in pocket. But I hope you enjoyed this look back, I think an important one, at Roger Stone and his history.
From networksradio.com, you have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
Meanwhile, lots of things are happening, and you'll have to depend on Justice Putnam and the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy to catch you up. Some of them include Representative Jamie Raskin calling for a congressional investigation into the $2 billion Saudi investment in Jared Kushner's private equity fund. Never too late to start that investigation. Good idea.